Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for this latest Rootwurks webinar, Traceability, What Every Food Manufacturer Needs to Know. My name is Ben Hartman. I'm the content manager here at Rootwurks, and I'll be your host for this webinar today. So as the name suggests, in food manufacturing, traceability is the ability to trace a food product and all of its ingredients through every stage of the production process, while also keeping really good records of the whole process. But why is it important in food manufacturing, and what are some of the steps you can take to make it easier to implement a traceability program? For all that, we've got an expert here today, so let's go ahead and introduce him. Joel Chappelle is an attorney and consultant with Food Industry Counsel LLC and has expertise in all aspects of food production, federal regulatory compliance, product safety, and supply chain risk. He's also a U.S. Army veteran, and he's worked for a number of the country's largest food companies and has helped them navigate a number of complex safety and regulatory issues. So definitely knows what he's talking about on this subject. Hi, Joel. Thanks for being with us today.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for having me. And hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I'm looking forward to talking about the FDA's traceability rule.
Yeah, well, our pleasure. So I guess just start with a pretty open one. What is traceability for those of you out there who might not have a clear idea?
Traceability can mean several things. In the context of food safety, we're referring to the ability to, I would say, track and trace a given food product through all stages of the supply chain, from harvest to production, to processing, to distribution, potentially to retail, and then ultimately to a consumer. And it includes information about the ingredient processing history, any sort of transportation from one place to another, and then location and storage times wherever the product may be stored.
Mm-hmm. So what are the things when it comes to traceability, people talk about a lot of the industry that's kind of looming. There's still a bit of time, but time goes by pretty quick. What is FSMA 204D, and what do people need to know about it?
Well, so just generally, the Food Safety Modernization Act, as I think we're all familiar with at this point, is a law that was enacted in 2011 and fundamentally altered and increased the basically the requirements that food companies face for all aspects of food safety. And the way it was basically presented by Congress was, Congress basically came to FDA and said, we're going to draft and pass this litigation, and we want you to stop foodborne illness outright. And so FSMA represents basically all the tools that FDA has come up with to implement the Food Safety Modernization Act. And those are mostly kind of trickle-down requirements for food companies.
Mm-hmm. So what is it? I mean, what do you need to trace? Like, I understand there's actually a food traceability list. I think we have a slide here that goes across. It's quite extensive. It's almost like what's, I guess, more better as might be what's not on the list. But what can you tell us about that?
Sure. So basically, the food traceability rule is not applicable to all products, nor is it applicable to all entities. And we can talk about some of the exemptions afterwards. But specifically, FDA has identified a list of foods that you referenced and is in our list there that tend to be the most dangerous types of food or most commonly associated with foodborne illness outbreaks. And as you can see from the list, it is pretty comprehensive. It includes cheese, shell eggs, basically all fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh herbs, leafy greens, tropical tree fruits, fish, crustaceans, and some mollusks and bivalves like oysters, clams, mussels, that sort of thing. And so basically, when we're looking at the traceability rule, the first question is going to be, does our company, produce, hold, pack, or ship any of the products that are on the food traceability list? If so, then you're likely applicable if you're not subject to an exemption.
What do these all these different types of foods have in common? Is it that they're not shelf stable or perishable? Is it they're more dangerous? They can't just just sit on a shelf and be fine indefinitely?
All those things, and basically the association with foodborne illness. These products tend to be sort of the usual suspects, as it were, with respect to foodborne illness outbreaks. And so FDA identified these foods as the group that is most important when it comes to be able to do a rapid trace back. And we've seen in the past with like some of the lettuce outbreaks and some of the pepper outbreaks and some of the fruit outbreaks where traceability can be very difficult, especially when you're going from, perhaps like imported lettuce, right? Or even, domestic lettuce from like the Salinas Valley. We've seen a number of outbreaks where traceability was very difficult. And what that led to, of course, is longer outbreaks with more people getting sick because either agency or industry or both were not able to readily identify the original source of the illness-causing product.
Mm-hmm. So if a company is looking to, is required to implement all these by January 2026, what's going to happen if they aren't ready? So what type of, consequences could they face?
Don't do it. Is what I would say. There are a lot of potential consequences that would be associated for not having traceability in place, A, both in compliance with the FDA's traceability rule, but B, also just as a matter of good practice. And so, for instance, if FDA comes in and your product is associated with potential illness and you don't have this traceability program in place, it's likely going to ultimately result in a much larger recall. If you can't, definitively point to, these are the products, this is where they came from, the FDA is going to tell you to recall everything. Beyond that, from a civil standpoint, it's going to make for some very uncomfortable depositions and very, potentially difficult issues with respect to settling claims. You're going to face potential punitive damages if the rule is in place and these traceability programs are not yet extant at your company. And so, basically every aspect of liability would increase in the event that come January 20th of 2026, your company doesn't have this program in place.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned like an incident or an outbreak or something. I could jump into that. What happens in the event that there is some sort of foodborne illness outbreak and you do have a good traceability program, or let's say you just don't have one? Like, what is the difference that it would make, for you or for consumers?
Absolutely. So first and most importantly, we're talking about minimizing the number of illnesses and mitigating the amount of time that the outbreak occurs over. So without a traceability program in place, you're likely going to experience an inability to identify and remove potentially contaminated products from the marketplace. And this is going to lead potentially to a wider spread of illness, larger recalls, as I mentioned, again, loss of customers, inability perhaps to identify who the problematic supplier is. It's always helpful in the civil context with respect to lawsuits and things to be able to say, okay, we were a link in the chain, but we can point to our supplier as the original source of this illness-causing agent. And that's very helpful in terms of reducing your liability, your risk, and also maintaining good customer relationships. Your customers are going to want to know, okay, here's this product that's subject to this recall. Are you able to definitively identify what is and what is not involved? And to the extent you don't have a traceability program, again, it's going to make for some very difficult question and answer sessions with both regulators and potentially customers or, down the line attorneys for any sick claimants.
That's what I was wondering. Also, beyond the civil aspect, I mean, can it get to potentially like the level of criminal proceedings?
Hypothetically, yes. And what we've seen over probably the last decade is that FDA has really enhanced the circumstances in which it will criminally prosecute companies for foodborne illness outbreaks. And this is something that's referred to as the Park Doctrine. And basically what it means is that FDA can refer a case to DOJ and say, hey, this company, did wrong, whatever the reason may be. In this case, they failed to have a traceability program in place. And as a result, the outbreak was much worse. Therefore, we, FDA, are going to refer this company for criminal sanctions. And under the Park Doctrine, executives at the company, we're talking about perhaps the head of food safety or the CEO or CFO even, could potentially be charged personally and criminally for violations. And it can be years in jail and also very substantial fines. So, one of the things we try and tell our clients all the time is, look, this is not a game. This is, absolutely very serious business. Of course, nobody wants to make anyone sick, but as burdensome as it can sometimes be to comply with the regulations, failure to do so, could realistically wind up in your head of food safety or your CEO facing potential jail time, and that's a scary thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they can go all the way to the top in terms of the consequences. They wouldn't just settle with going after some line workers or something. They're going to hold people responsible on the top level potentially. Exactly.
And the Park Doctrine is also more formally referred to as the Responsible Corporate Officer Doctrine. And to your point, what that means is that the corporate officers or leadership who are responsible for food safety can be held criminally liable for the failures of the company, even if they don't know about the failures necessarily. This is a strict liability offense, which makes it even harder to defend against.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the bottom line is that even if there's not a some sort of fine or anything like that, it's very much in your interest to do it regardless of whatever the requirement is from them in terms of just product safety and everything else.
Precisely correct. And it's a rule that is not going to be tremendously difficult to follow. There's going to likely be some hiccups here and there, of course, as there is when any rule is implemented, but it's a relatively easy rule to put in place and to follow. And certainly the choice not to put into place these traceability measures, there's no good outcomes as a result. You're not ultimately going to be saving yourself any time or trouble or hassle. It's quite the opposite.
Mm-hmm. So definitely it's of crucial importance, but I guess clearly established that, but what if a company wants to put these measures in place? What are some of the initial steps for doing so?
Well, sure. And with this, we could just go to the slide, and what we'll start with here is just basically the first applicability analysis, right? First, are you producing products that are on the food traceability list? If not, I strongly recommend you still have traceability measures in place, but they don't necessarily have to be in compliance with this rule. Secondarily, what is your role? There are exemptions that apply to the rule, and perhaps we can kind of discuss those next. But you want to identify your role in the supply chain, and that will have an important role in what your sort of responsibilities are. Following that, if you're in an applicable role, you're going to want to look for exemptions or qualifications that might alter or exempt you from the rule. And then finally, implement the traceability program requirements. And so for exemptions, and I'll just touch on this briefly, small businesses are generally exempt or partially exempt, subject to just how small they are. Certain types of farming operations are exempt, again, particularly those that are considered small or very small, based on the regulatory definition. If anybody's streaming from a fishing vessel, you can go ahead and get back on the water because you're exempt. Likewise, nonprofit food establishments and retail food establishments are generally exempt, as are those entities exclusively transporting food. They're exempt from at least certain aspects of the rule, as their primary role isn't in producing, processing, or selling the food products.
Mm-hmm. How important is collaboration, I guess, with different companies? Like you've got different providers and people in your supply chain. And I mean, is traceability only as good as, if people aren't forthcoming and you're not able to collaborate with them and understand where everything that is coming to you is coming from? How important is that, I guess?
Sure. And that's kind of a double-edged sword there, because on the one hand, This rule has been in the works for a long time, and as a result, there are a plethora of software programs available that can kind of link the entire supply chain. They're relatively easy to access. There's enough choice that basically any company can find a program that works for them. Additionally, a lot of companies kind of source the tracing or traceability upstream, right? They require of their suppliers that they have a traceability program in place that meets certain parameters, so that once you receive the products, it's basically a plug and play. You can plug that data right into your own data and maintain the traceability that way. And then really all you have to be concerned about is the traceability of your own products internally, right? And that makes it a lot easier than trying to internally go back and figure out which particular field a given head of lettuce may have come from, for instance. And so to answer your question, yes, collaboration is exceedingly important. It's necessary because you don't just need traceability from the time you receive it till the time you ship it. You need it all the way back. And this needs to be kind of an unbroken chain, ideally from consumer, should it get that far, all the way back to whatever the original source of that ingredient is.
What are these, we talk about record keeping that is needed for traceability. What does good record keeping entail? I guess how in depth or how detailed does it need to be? What does it need to say?
Well, it's a good question. So record keeping, of course, is fundamental to traceability, right? Without the ability to look back and retrieve the pertinent information or data relating to the source and supply chain of whatever the implicated product may be, there is no traceability. And so, we need to have good record keeping. We need the ability to be able to go back and based on a limited amount of downstream information, be able to provide a clear picture of what happened upstream. In terms of best practices, I'd say they include, just maintaining accurate and detailed records, using electronic systems for ease of access and sharing. Again, I referenced software programs. There are, as many of them as there are opinions on software programs, and basically every company can kind of look and make a determination as to what is best for them. For now, FDA is giving companies a fair amount of leeway in the how of these programs. But that's, of course, singularly dependent on being able to demonstrate efficacy. It needs to work every time on time. So here again, even though the rule doesn't take effect until a year from January, we like to see companies trying to get this implemented now. And I just can't overstate the importance from the standpoint of developing these programs, the importance of conducting internal testing and drills to ensure the programs work. One of the exercises that we've done with clients is we'll confer with perhaps the CEO or the head of food safety, and we'll make arrangements with them. We're gonna drop in on you at some point next month, functionally unannounced. We'll pull a product from retail somewhere. Nobody's gonna know except for us what that product is, and when we walk in, we're gonna play the role of FDA, and you're gonna test your traceability, and that's a great drill. Companies can use. You don't need me to do it. You can do it internally, but it's a great exercise to just determine does our traceability work? Because what looks great on paper can sometimes not work so well in practice. And finding out when the real FDA is at the door asking you to do a trace back that there's a gap in your program. It is not the time to learn about that gap.
So you're saying it's a preventative approach is better than a reactive one, I imagine.
Precisely. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Prep now. Try and stump yourself. And if you can't, then now you've got the peace of mind to know, okay, we're ready. And you can also have the peace of mind of knowing that your company is prepared to take the action necessary to prevent some customer down the way from getting sick, and I think everybody can feel good about that.
No, definitely. It applies to so many things in life, a preventative approach. And also what also applies to so many things in life is that a year and a half goes by quite quickly, especially the older you get. Like a year and a half, years, that's nothing. If we're really
It's very true.
Being
Yeah.
honest about it. And in terms of the record keeping, is it something that, I mean, maybe every company is different, but is it something that every employee needs to take part in, or it should be kind of a dedicated member of the staff, or what do you think is kind of, I guess, the ideal way for it to play out?
Well, so it will depend on the company and exactly what's going on. Now, the rules do require that there must be a contact point, or a point of contact for this, right? A specific person who can be reached at any given time. And so, yes, you do want a specific person who's kind of your boss role in terms of your traceability, but it's something that everybody should be involved in. And I think traceability is just yet another cog in the wheel of good food safety culture, right? And everybody should have a pretty good understanding of, okay, these are requirements. This is what needs to be done. Because all of these pieces kind of eventually combine into a single program, and the better informed everybody is, the better the results are ultimately going to be.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the, I guess we're talking about, let's say, a smaller company versus a larger company. A larger company, let's say, has more resources, more people. They can dedicate specifically to things like traceability. It would seem like it would be easier, but maybe they also have more things to trace. What do you think? What would you recommend for a company that's maybe smaller and already kind of, maybe doesn't have a ton of people on deck to handle everything?
Most certainly. I think this would be a good point to go to the slide for the traceability plan requirements. And so, with a small company or a large company, as you know, there's going to be different considerations, different concerns, different levels of complexity. Being a smaller company, obviously, you're not going to have the resources of one of the largest companies in the United States, for instance. But at the same time, you're presumably going to have a relatively easier means of maintaining traceability, just because you're not involved with quite so much in terms of, you don't have your own shipping entities that are part of the company. Perhaps you're not using 100 different products that are on this list. And so ultimately what you want to do is take a company by company approach. And the first sort of starting point would be to develop a description or get an understanding of where your traceability currently exists, right? And then compare that to the requirements of 21 CFR 1.1315. It's a mouthful, but it's a relatively straightforward regulation. And it requires of a traceability plan that there's a description of the procedures used to maintain traceability. That includes records, in the location of the records, where they're stored, how they're stored, and what format they're in, right? And so as you're looking ahead, you can hopefully say, oh, look, we've already got this part done based on our current level of traceability, or maybe there's just a few tweaks here and there, and that can simplify. After that, then you're going to want a description of the procedures used to identify whether the foods you manufacture, process, pack, hold, et cetera, are on the food traceability list. There too, it's very simple. We look at the list, and then we look at the products or ingredients that we're producing, and where there's overlap, there needs to be a traceability plan. Then a description of how the traceability lot codes are assigned to foods on the food traceability list. Here too, this is where software can be especially helpful, because you can, again, connect those links in the supply chain. And ideally what you have is uniform traceability lot codes that start at the very beginning and are used all the way through retail. And that's one of those collaboration points that we talked about. By using this year that you have now to kind of prepare, talk to your suppliers, and those suppliers are going to be under the same obligations that you are, and so it's going to make sense to say, okay, how best can we do this? Oftentimes, as a customer, you're going to have a little bit more weight to pull. Because your supplier is going to want to maintain that business relationship. The opposite can hold true with downstream customers for the same reasons. And then the traceability plan, as I mentioned, it needs a statement identifying the point of contact for questions. So the FDA has one person, one phone number, one email address where, if need be, that they can reach out and start getting the answers to their questions right away. And then finally, just for farm entities that produce foods that are on the food traceability list, the plan needs to include a map depicting where on the property the specific foods are grown or raised.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add, just in terms of maintaining these plans, they need to be updated as needed. And then if you do make any changes, the old plan needs to be stored for 2 years, held on to. That's usually pretty easy to do, especially today's day and age with email and everything else. You can just email it to yourself basically and have some assurance that it'll be available for 2 years. If you're a small company, I think a larger company is probably not gonna have to worry too much about that.
So 2 years, and I mean, and digital copies are okay, right? They're not asking you to keep big like banker boxes full of manila folders and whatnot.
I'm sure they're encouraging against the banker boxes these days. Yeah, electronic is just fine.
Oh yeah, well, you never know, but yeah, definitely it's 2024. So you talked about a couple of different risks in terms of foodborne illnesses and whatnot. Something I was thinking about, a big risk for a lot of people. What about, can it help with food allergies and knowing, if there's potential allergens in your food that you're taking?
Yes, of course. And we see a ton of recalls that are necessitated by undeclared allergens. And, there too, with a good traceability program, you can take a product that's on the market and look back and tie it to a specific lot, right? And go back to those records and identify, okay, here is where this would have occurred. And by being able to do that, just as is the case with foodborne illness, you're going to be able to limit the amount of product that you're going to have to recall. So, to the extent you've got a traceability plan in place, it's effective, it's operative, and it's compliant with FDA regulations. You can go to FDA and say, look, we had this issue, but we've identified this single lot where the allergen was introduced, or where maybe the supplier's product that had the allergen present was introduced to our product, and then you can limit the recall to that single lot, as opposed to, well, we know it was this product, but as for when or what day it was produced on or what lot, we're not really going to be able to get into that granular of a detail. And then what you're going to be faced with is, okay, recall everything that is not yet reached its expiration date or which may still be on the market, and that can make the difference between your company remaining in business or not. And I've personally seen it where a lack of good record keeping sinks a company. Insurers can use that as a means to decline recall coverage or deny a claim. It's just so important on every level, because these consequences that I reference, they tend to be cumulative, right? Everyone is adding on top of the next, and it can get away from you quickly.
Absolutely. I think the overarching theme of so much of it is just it's making things easier on you, and also safer. I mean, it's significant lift and effort, let's say, on the front end, but it's in your own interest, own best interest of the company, for sure.
It is, and it's just cool too. I mean, it's cool to be able to take a product and say, oh, I can take my, let's say it's a bag of spinach, right? And you can say, I can take this bag of spinach and I can trace it back and tell you exactly what farm it was grown on, what day it was harvested, and from what part of the farm ultimately. That's really cool. And it's something that from a technological standpoint has not even been possible until recent improvements in technology. And so for the nerds out there like myself, it's just kind of a cool thing to be able to do.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. I think it's something also we kind of take for granted. Not to get into globalization, everything, but how much the world is connected and how much, the products we see come from so many different places on Earth, and just be able to trace that back is something that, I think we tend to just kind of take for granted these days. But it is pretty fascinating, actually. You know, um, what about in terms of not just safety and safer products? What about the quality of products and controlling, just quality control, making sure you got everything you need in there?
Oh, absolutely. With respect to quality control, obviously there are a virtually unlimited set of sort of subparts to that. But when we put that in the context of traceability, you can see that quality control and traceability do go very much hand in hand. Now, for example, right? Let's say you're getting products in from 10 different suppliers, and they're occasionally commingled, or maybe there's lotting differences or batching differences, but probably pretty difficult historically to figure out, okay, this particular batch had a problem. Who was the source of the problem? With traceability, especially digital traceability, what you're going to have the ability to do here is look back and say, okay, we had a problem with this lot, and this lot, and with a couple keystrokes, figure out who's the common supplier, right? And so from a preventative standpoint, as you mentioned a few times, that's going to allow you to identify potentially problematic suppliers right at the outset, ideally before there's ever an actual problem or illness or undeclared allergen in the product, right? And so it gives you visibility into your suppliers just by having that collected data when problems do emerge. Additionally, having that traceability, you've got the means to look back and say, okay, let's say you've got a supplier who's maybe running a little bit behind, got a lot of orders going out. Something happens to sit for maybe a few days longer. We're talking about fresh produce that can be a very meaningful time. It might help you right at the front end to either reject a load or identify that one product or another has to follow maybe a slightly faster timeline if it is going to go out. And so in terms of quality, but also visibility into your suppliers. Traceability is very helpful from the quality control standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes perfect sense. So before we check out here today, I thought I'd ask also just I guess from the consumer standpoint, do you think this is something that consumers are going to demand more and more, being able to see, or more, I guess, visibility about where things come from and that it's been traced back, or is it something that they're also becoming more and more savvy about?
I do think so. And I think the more that consumers are confronted with the marketing aspects of traceability, the more they're going to expect that kind of, from everybody. And what I mean there is, some companies now are using like QR codes, where you can scan the QR code and you can get full traceability right from your phone of that product. And the consumer can look and say, okay, I'm comfortable with this. Now, let's say you've got a consumer who's maybe buying organic and wants to have some assurance that indeed that product is in fact organic. Having that traceability information at the tip of their fingers is something that they are going to utilize and eventually will come to expect. And they may pass over a product that doesn't have that traceability information. Additionally, consumers tend to think it's cool. As I mentioned, it's neat to be able to see exactly where your food came from. I mean, there is no product that we purchase with which we have a more intimate relationship than food. It's something that we put into our bodies to sustain us, and given the risks that come with it, the level of comfort that comes with being able to see the whole supply chain of your product, it is pretty profound. And I think not only do you have these regulatory requirements that are mandating this traceability, what often follows from that is the consumer expectation that it's going to be there. And we see that in many regards. Over the past 20 years, as sort of new rules have been adopted and then just become part of the consumer consciousness.
Yeah, definitely see that in the consciousness. People just culturally more interested in it. You see, from something as simple as just local restaurants, wanting to show you that, everything comes from the general area and stuff like that. It's something, I don't think the average consumer is going blind into things like they would have done so in the past as much. Well, lots of great food for thought, no pun intended, and a lot of really important takeaways for people to put into effect ahead of time so they're ready in their own self-interest and their company and also their consumers. If you want to learn more about the Food Industry Counsel and or reach out to Joel, here's where you can reach him and check out what they're doing and all that. Also here at Rootwurks, we're launching the Traceability bot, which is going to help people find out where they can find the information in these guidelines for what they need to implement to be ready by January 2026. Again, don't go into it blind all by yourself. There's a lot to leaf through, and it should help you find where those answers are. Also, we still have our HACCP certification course for a very, very affordable price here for a limited time. So go check that out. HACCP, another one of the more important set of guidelines people in the food industry can implement for safety. And also, if you want to check us out here on Rootwurks and the Rootwurks Learning Experience platform, it's our flagship platform about training and compliance and tons of learning resources. We also have a lot about record keeping tools there that can support traceability and compliance, and also track what you're doing for training and what you're doing in your compliance measures. So all very important, with, again, the overall goal of creating safer products, safer workplaces, and safer communities and consumers. So thanks everybody for tuning in. This is all it's all been fascinating, and we really appreciate it, Joel.
Thanks. I would just like to add as a finishing point, Ben, I've just been really impressed with everything that Rootwurks puts out. And for those watching, I truly can't recommend Rootwurks enough. If you haven't delved into sort of the programmatic aspects of this, like I've talked about, the software and things, give Rootwurks a look first. They truly are, from both a service standpoint and just the products that they have. I've been very impressed with the work you guys do and the products that you have on offer. And I'm not being paid to say that or anything like that, Ben. We've known each other for some time, and I think Rootwurks is the best of the best, at least in terms of the companies that I've worked for in this space. And so awesome. I do really highly recommend you guys. And similarly, if anybody does have any questions, check out Rootwurks or feel free to email me, and I'm happy to have a discussion or answer any questions as best I can.
That's great. Well, I appreciate that, Joel, and obviously agree 100%. That's great. Well, thanks again for being on with us here today. Check out Food Industry Counsel. Check out what we're doing at Rootwurks, and be ready by January 2026. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody.